أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. In the name of God, most merciful, ever merciful, and may God's peace and blessings be upon His holy Prophet Muhammad and the purified members of his household and progeny. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى جعفر وجمع. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. For today's session, we're going to take a little bit of a break from the series that we're doing. Generally speaking, before I go into the topic, the tone for today, and I think we have not had a lot of these types of sessions, except maybe one before the month of Sha'ban, at the beginning of the month of Sha'ban. These are more spiritual in tone, and they're supposed to be, if we want to put them in a field, in an Islamic science or field, these are akhlaq. And until now, I've intentionally avoided akhlaq, because once we get into akhlaq, we're supposed to have all the necessary background so that we don't need to constantly argue and show the proofs for the things that we have to take for granted when we're talking about the akhlaq topics. Inshallah, if we cover the entire series in aqa'id and beliefs, and we show all the proofs for all of our beliefs, at least at an introductory level, we'll be ready to get into slightly more, let's call them complex or advanced topics, in that they require this entire system of beliefs first before we can talk about them. So it's not that we don't want to talk about akhlaq in general. Inshallah, it's going to be one of our main fields, and we're going to talk about it in depth. It's a whole field, it's a science like any other. And we can, so some of the books, one of the best classics in the field is actually 8 volumes big. It's called Al-Mahajja Al-Bayda. So it's not that there is no subject matter or that it's not a science. It's a complete science on its own, just like any other field. But before we get into it, we need to establish a logical foundation for all of our beliefs first, and then inshallah we'll be ready to talk about those topics a little bit more. So for today's session, instead of going into an entire lecture that we come up with and put together with different points, I thought that we would simply go over the sermon that the Holy Prophet gave right before the beginning of Shahr Ramadan. Many of you have probably heard this sermon. I think it's very important to learn it, to study it every year. Those who want to take full benefit of the month of Shahr Ramadan, they spend a little bit of time, a few moments, to refresh their memory and to get themselves spiritually ready for the month of Ramadan by looking at this, or studying or reading this sermon from the Holy Prophet. So if we go back in time, you have to try to put yourself in that situation. So it's the night of the first of Shahr Ramadan, and you have the Holy Prophet who stands up, takes to the pulpit, and gives this sermon. So he wants to make sure that people understand what they are about to embark on, what's about to happen. This is not a month like any other month, and it's not enough to just say this is a special month. So we're going to see what the Holy Prophet is saying in this sermon. It's not a very long sermon, and for us, we could easily spend an entire lecture without exaggeration on every word or couple of words on this sermon if we wanted to. There's a lot of depth to it. There's a lot of explanation that can be given. But for now, all we're trying to do is to kind of we're just trying to see at a cursory level, at an introductory level, what is the Holy Prophet trying to say before the month of Ramadan. The difference between this, the timing of this, and when this is usually given, which is a day or two before the holy month, this is when usually this sermon is presented. There's a reason why we decided that we're going to give it a couple of weeks before. And inshallah it will be clear towards the end. We'll mention a few points, especially towards the end. But generally speaking, the point is to prepare ourselves. And maybe if we wait until a day or two to properly prepare ourselves, it's not enough time. There's a lot of events that happened in the holy month of Sha'ban. We talked about it at the beginning of the month. And we are about the midpoint of the month of Sha'ban. And in fact, tonight is an extremely important night of this month. So on one side, we have the birth of Imam al-Hajjaj Allah Farajah, which gives a huge sanctity, sacredness, specialness to this night. And on the other side, beyond that, that is very special on its own. The night itself carries its own weight and sacredness. And in our riwayat, in our narrations, it is clearly stated that this is the most sacred night of the year after the night of Al-Qadr, or the nights of Al-Qadr. So this gives us an idea of how incredibly special this night is supposed to be. The holy Imams have insisted that their companions spend this night in as much worship, as much introspection, remembrance as possible. We have narrations, for instance, that say that Laylatul Qadr, the special character of Laylatul Qadr, the merit goes back to the Holy Prophet, whereas this night, the merit goes to the rest of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. So a lot of time can be spent about this night specifically. So our topic is supposed to be about the holy month of Ramadan. But as we said when we entered the month of Sha'ban, we said it's important to prepare ourselves before we go in. So consider tonight as the night you start your preparation for the holy month of Ramadan. The timing is probably as good as it can be. 2 weeks is a very good time for someone to start thinking, spiritually preparing themselves to get into the holy month of Ramadan. So some of the interesting aspects of this sermon from the Holy Prophet, first of all, is that, and this applies to a lot of the narrations and especially the sermons that we have from Ahlul Bayt, we do have to think about how were these preserved for us. It's not common for people to be able to preserve the exact words of something like a sermon so that people can actually remember it and study it over, for now, 14 centuries. There's a part of it that, of course, we can study in the science of hadith and we see how this was actually maintained. But there's another dimension of it, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to preserve these words. There's something special, there's a character, a special character to these words. And as they say in akhlaq, they say that because of the sincere, pure intentions with which these words were said, they needed to be preserved. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates the conditions to preserve them. And this applies to any action. This applies to any act. When it's done with sincerity and with the right intentions, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to preserve that act and that intention one way or another. And that's why in the narrations they say that this becomes your sadaqah or sadaqah jariyah. It's as though you're constantly in an act of charity giving when you've actually done that act in a specific moment in time and you're done. You gave money, or you helped someone, or you wrote a book, or you gave a lecture, whatever it may be. But you did it with the right intentions, and one way or another Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to preserve that act throughout time because of the sincerity of your action. Otherwise, there's a lot of words that are said and a lot of good actions and a lot of good deeds that are done. Not all of them are preserved and maintained over that long period of time. So why some of them and not others? So this is one of the secrets behind this preservation. The second thing is, and this is more of a reminder for us, that if we want to preach or teach or explain something, especially related to religion, but everything in general, but for us, because we're talking about religion, and we've talked a lot about this to do it with wisdom and to do it in the right way, if we want to explain religion, answer questions, explain things, timing is actually important. You can't just do it at any time. You have to choose your time carefully. So as we said, in this sermon was actually given at a very specific time. The Holy Prophet didn't do it too far out from the holy month of Ramadan. He wants to do it at a time when he maximizes the impact and the benefit of those words to the people listening to the Holy Prophet. And so this is for us, if ever we're in a situation where we're teaching, where we're presenting something, when we're even writing, whatever it may be, it has to be presented in the right circumstances. It has to be done with wisdom, right? So this is part of the wisdom, to study the circumstances and use it to the full advantage so that it actually achieves the purpose for which it's meant to achieve. The last point, very quickly, that I mentioned, and then we get into the actual sermon of the Holy Prophet, is that I think, for me anyways, although we may hear this sermon often, there are parts of it that are not mentioned. And one of the parts that is not always mentioned is who this sermon is narrated from or through. The narrator of this sermon is actually Imam Ali alayhi salam. He's the one who says the Holy Prophet stood up. It was the eve of the first of the Ramadan, and the Holy Prophet stood up and said this. And at the end of it, there's a part that I'm not going to read today because it's not as appropriate to do it now. Inshallah, we may get an opportunity to finish it, very small part. But it clearly shows us that it is Imam Ali alayhi salam who is the one narrating this. So we'll mention one part of the ending and we'll leave the other parts to later, inshallah.